Oh, there we go. Thank you. Good morning, PMC. Happy Pride. My name is HK. For those who don't know me, my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I will admit to you that I am nervous to be speaking to you today, but we'll get through this together. So, I'd like to give you, that's good. Probably not, but anyways, I'd like to give you some context for where I'm speaking from and who I am. I'm a cis lesbian Chinese American, adopted from China, raised in Texas. I attended several evangelical, non-denominational churches, a Baptist elementary school, and a Church of Christ middle school and high school. So suffice it to say, I was raised in the church. I walked away from the church slowly and then all at once, namely during 2020 and 2021. I'm an only child, though I have several people I would call sibling, and I'm an engineer by training. I will give a trigger warning that sexual abuse is mentioned, but that's it, nothing graphic. So, when I was reading this passage and reflecting on how I'd seen it in my own life, the phrase, light will shine out of darkness, really stuck out to me. And so, I just want to share some moments of light and dark, and a lot of in between, which is where most of life is lived. As I previously shared for Epiphany Sunday, I had these encounters with God starting from a really young age, when I was about 5, around the same time that, unfortunately, my adopted father started abusing me sexually. I had met this presence before, this presence that would enter my room, when I'd said a prayer inviting them into my life and into my heart. Though as I look back over my life, something tells me they were always present. This presence would show up over and over again on some of the darkest nights of my young life. The room would change, the atmosphere would shift, and everything belonged. I belonged without expectation or obligation or sacrifice of self. And the most important thing I had to do was tell God how my day was. That's what they were like. I would wrestle and still wrestle for years with how and when God chose to show up. After, but not during. And all I can tell you is that God respects our free will, our decisions for great love and great evil, and that I was not left alone to suffer. God would sit with me and listen to me for hours. God became a parent who cared for the minutiae of my life and never diminished any aspect of it. At the same time, my image of God, something I was taught was very important to have and to emulate, would change and shift naturally with the information I was taught and modeled. The dissonance of the God I was taught in Sunday school and in actual school, and the God who I would remember silly dancing with me in my bedroom, who delighted in me and in whose love I always felt safe, juxtaposed with a God who was disappointed I couldn't be more like them, who compared me to my peers and always found me lacking, and was always so self-serious, someone who cared infinitely enough to do something about it, versus someone who hadn't made up their mind and might consider me if I proved myself worthy. It made for an odd internal conflict. And as I've grown and as I grew, religion began to die in me, a gospel that could not contain me or my world, all of its complexity, confusion, and chaos. But something else had been living inside of me. This treasure that was me, a version of myself who had always been loved, enough, adored, delighted in, cared for, and seen. And a God who guided me to the right people in the right time at the right place, even when I couldn't see it. In verse 7, Paul talks about jars of clay. So that it might be clear this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. There's this theme of God choosing the underdog, the unexpected, and what appears lackluster to display and store their power in and through. When I was in high school, we volunteered at a shelter for the unhoused, a very transactional one, as one might expect in the South, in which unhoused people traded proselytization for food. And so they would sit and listen to a sermon, and then they would go and get food. And one morning during the breakfast shift, I had been asked to share my story later that day. And I was like, what story? I thought to myself as I measured out grits to people. I was like, I don't have a story. Like, what do you mean? Like, I had to do this in like 30 minutes and think of something? By the time it was my turn, we were sitting up on stage and I was first to go, looking at a crowd of expectant people, both for food and for this to be over with so they could eat the food. And that presence washed over me again, or anxiety, or both, who's to say? And it was like someone else was speaking through me, speaking about my first wound, my abandonment, my loss, my adoption. I remember a girl in the second row asking the woman next to her why I was crying. It was great. I was like, oh. I also remember several people walking up to me afterwards and sharing pieces of their story, a feeling of connection, of something honest that I had shared that they felt they could connect to. Maybe the power God chooses to store in us is this honesty, this ability to name our grief and our joy, to draw lines of connection through seeing one another. Maybe this power chooses what is fragile because its concern is not strength or domination, but resilience and solidarity. I was baptized for the first time at 18, so a Mennonite before he even joined. Woohoo. Yes. In the Jordan River, on a trip to the stolen Holy Land. And as I shut my eyes, I was being put back in the water, and I felt the water and the coolness surround me. That same presence met me again, the same presence that had fallen when I was 5, that had descended through me, both within and without, waiting for me in the water and already inside of me, hemming me in on all sides, if you will. I didn't know how much I would need it in that moment, how much that presence, that reminder of a God who had known me and loved me would be so important. The next day, I would be triggered to remember for the first time at 18 the abuse of my childhood. It would come rushing back to me in a very painful moment sitting in a hotel room, just watching the internal image of my life crumble and not knowing what to do. As I sat around on the bus and we drove around historical sites, fabled sites of where Christ had been, I realized I needed a God who suffered. I needed cruelty to answer for the cruelty of my own suffering, a God who could bear the pain I felt and the loss I had endured. The death of my innocence had to be felt. It had to be understood by the same God who had watched me count to 100 for the first time at the age of 6. They had to know. We got to the Garden Tomb, a place that I personally feel like Jesus might have been buried and resurrected. I'm sure there's plenty more dispute, but it felt better to me than the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, if I'm going to be honest. If you've been there, you know. When I walked in, that presence met me again so strongly into the tomb. A God who knew skin and bones, who had felt my humanity even as it was taken from me. A person who could see me. And when I walked out of the tomb, I saw in my mind's eye that this person who knew how to die and live again would stay with me and would teach me to do the same. I'll be honest, this next part I went back and forth on about whether I should put it in because it felt vulnerable and terrifying. As I listened to my own story and as I wrote this, I was like, this sounds very individualistic, but I think the reality of it is just loneliness, honest loneliness, doing this by myself, living and fighting for myself until we could be here. Like a star forming, I learned to form from what seems like nothing to the naked eye, something. I took the elements of what were true and felt honest to myself and pulled them to me closer and closer until something changed, until a threshold, until combustion and light, until I could see the truth. I am not alone. that what makes up me is what makes everything around me. In closing, I want to share an excerpt from a poem I recently read by Andrea Gibson from her collection, You Better Be Lightning. This is like near the end of the poem. Every time I've said I wanted to die. Come flood my home with your eyes. I read that people scream when they are in pain because screaming lessens the pain. Anyone who asks you to hold your tongue is asking you to hold the heaviest thing in the galaxy. Forget them and remember you can tell me anything about how hard it is to stop flirting with your expiration date. I understand being wooed by the finish line of sadness. Infinity still sends me, I don't know if I can say this in church, but I'm gonna read it. Infinity still sends me nudes every day. I won't deny, she looks amazing. But I'm taken. My hand now promised to writing every page of my story, except its end. Friend, you are who taught me that a difficult life is not less worth living than a gentle one. Joy is just easier to carry than sorrow. You can lift a city from how long you've spent holding what's been nearly impossible to hold. This world needs to know those who know how to do that, those who can find a tunnel with no light at the end and hold it up like a telescope to show that the darkness contains many truths that can bring light to its knees. Grief astronomer, adjust the lens, look close, tell us what you see. Thank you.